All right, now it's your turn. I want you to create a Bootstrap button component. So here on Bootstrap website, if you look at the buttons page, you can see we have different types of buttons. Now for this exercise, I want you to only focus on this set of buttons because here we have other flavors. Don't worry about them. Don't worry about the sizes or outline buttons, just simple Bootstrap buttons. Now, the markup is really simple. Each button has two classes. One is btn, which is a base class, and the other is a class that identifies the color. So by default, primary buttons are blue, secondary buttons are gray, and so on. So I want you to encapsulate this markup inside a reusable React component. So spend a few minutes on this, then be sure to come back and see my solution as I'll be showing you a really cool TypeScript technique. All right, here in the components folder, we add a new file called button.tsx. Now we use our shortcut, rafc. Good. Next, we rename div to button and give it a couple of classes. I'm typing a little bit too fast because I'm assuming you have already done your exercise, so I'm not expecting you to code along with me, okay? So here we have two classes. For now, let's just stick to primary buttons, and then we make this dynamic. So this is the approach I want you to take while building applications, one step at a time. Don't try to do too many things together, okay? So for now, I just want to render a basic button. I don't even want to make the text dynamic. Let's see if our application works up to this point. So we go to our app component, and in this div, we add a button component, okay? Now, back to the browser. Here's our button, beautiful. So the first step is done. Now, the next step is to make the text or label dynamic. So back to our button component. Here we need to use an interface to define the shape of props. Now I want to use the children prop here so we can pass the text just like HTML buttons. So I'm going to set the type of children to string. We could also use React Node, but I prefer to use a string in this case. Next, we add the props parameter and destructure it. And finally, we render children right here. Good. Now we go back to our app component and give this button a label like my button. Let's see if our application is working. Good. Again, don't worry about these errors. Everything is good so far. Next, we need to handle the click event because in a real-world application, when this button is clicked, we have to do something. What happens next should not be implemented in our button component. Otherwise, it's not going to be reusable, okay? So back to the button component. Here in the props object, we need to add a new prop called onClick. And this is going to be a function with no parameters that returns void. Next, we add it here, onClick. And finally, we set the onClick prop of the HTML button to the function that is passed from the outside. So onClick is going to be a function that is passed from the outside. So the parent of this component is going to pass that function. We get that function and simply pass it to this HTML button, okay? Now in our app component, we have an error because we haven't set the onClick prop. For now, I just want to add a simple inline function and log clicked on the console. Let's see if our application is working. So click, 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 beautiful. Now the final step is implementing the color. So we want to be able to pass the color of this button from the outside like this. So we can set it to primary or secondary or whatever. So let's add a new prop called color of type string. I prefer to sort these props in alphabetical order. It makes our code a little bit easier to read. That's nicer. Next, we add the color prop here, and we use that to add the second CSS class dynamically. So we wrap the code in braces. We terminate our string here, and then append the color right after. Okay? We have a compilation error because this quotation mark is unnecessary. Good. Now, in our app component, we have set the color to secondary. Let's see if it's working. Good. If we change it to primary, it's still working. Great. Now, what if you want to give this a default value? So we don't have to specify the color every single time. To do that, we go to our button class and give this color prop a default value of primary. With that, we get this blue button, beautiful. However, we have a compilation error in the app component saying property color is missing in type. So even though we gave this prop a default value, the TypeScript compiler still expects us to set the color prop when using the button component. To solve this problem, we have to tell the TypeScript compiler that this property is optional. So we add a question mark after, and now the error is gone. Okay? Now, what if we pass an invalid color here, like let's say React? What happens? Well, there are no errors or warnings, but this is not how a button is supposed to look like. This is where we can use TypeScript to catch this kind of bugs early on before we deploy our application. Let me show you how. So back to our button component, instead of setting the type of color to string, we can set it to a string literal like primary. And with this, we can only set this property to the value of primary. So if we set it to something else, we get a compilation error. Now, we don't want to be limited to primary. We want to support other colors. So here we can use the union operator and add a second string literal. So we can add secondary. We can also add danger, success, and other bootstrap colors. With this implementation, we can only set this property to one of these values and nothing else. So if we set it to React, for example, the TypeScript compiler is yelling at us. We can see this file turned red. And also, if we go to the View menu and look at the Problems panel, we can see that we have a problem in this file. So now, if we change this back to primary or secondary or one of the supported values, the error goes away.